A very good afternoon to the guys that have joined us now. We are live on our AI in Healthcare Summit. Up next is my brother, colleague, friend, Joel Oborogo, who's the CEO of CenHealth. He is a tech entrepreneur and executive. He is the founder and CEO of CenHealth, a healthcare technology company that specializes in digital health services and health technology solutions by leveraging emerging technologies, that is your AI, your Internet of Things, IoT, blockchain, mobile apps, and cloud computing. Today, Joel will be talking about how healthcare in Africa can leverage artificial intelligence. I'll hand over to you right now, Joel.
Okay. Uh, Thank you very much, Leslie. That was a very good introduction. So, thanks to yourself and Zenzele for inviting me on ML Africa. It's quite interesting. It's quite indeed an honor to join you guys again and talk on this webinar. So, thank you for that.
That's a pleasure.
Leslie introduced me in quite a lot of detail. I mean, my main area of focus has to be in strategy, health technology, emerging technologies, and also program management. Now, today I want to talk about how to leverage AI in Africa in the healthcare space. It's a very broad topic, I know that. So I'm looking at it more from a strategic viewpoint, much more a big, broad approach. How do we achieve these big things? Now, the speakers who have spoken before me talked extensively about detailed things on making these things happen. But before we get to that level of maturity, because some of them work in very matured organizations where they're very smart, digitally skilled individuals, how do we really move the rest of the people as a collective when we're looking at AI and also when it comes to digital? Like Vukosi, who spoke a few minutes before me, talked about data management. You find that I talk about data being very key. And I
Hi,
think that,
Joel. Sorry to
hello?
interrupt. I'm saying sorry to interrupt. We
Yes.
can't see your slides.
Oh, sorry.
Mm, yes,
Okay.
thank you so much.
Sorry. So sorry about that. So the key thing here is that as I was saying, as Vukosi just mentioned when he was talking about his own slide, he ended talking about data management. It's very key. I'm actually starting my talking about data management being a very key area in this whole thing. So I'll just go through what I'll talk about. Now, AI is applied in various areas in healthcare, and you had talked about computerizing the brain. You heard Jack talk about personalized AI in healthcare. So I'll just talk about the areas that AI is applicable to. It's applicable to a wide area, but we just go through it very quickly. So we talk about diagnostics. We talk about patient registration and appointments. You see how people are using chatbots, AI chatbots to um, do this process very well. A very good organization that is doing that is Babylon Health in the UK, medication adherence. So they're using AI chatbots underpinning with other technologies. Because the interesting thing to note here is this: AI technology is not necessarily a standalone technology. It has to be coupled with other technologies like conversational platforms, for instance. You're looking at IoT devices. How do you get the data from that in there? So those are the sort of things that you have to look about. That when you talk about AI, we're looking at the wider picture on AI. Then drug discovery and manufacturing. We're talking about medical imaging, especially when we're looking at what the radiologists use, and that has really taken off when we're talking about the use of AI there. And epidemic warning systems, just like what we're finding with the recent pandemic and everything, how some of these sort of AI solutions have been applied, and also how it was even applied in actually finding a solution with the vaccine, because the AI application was really quite fast and astounding in this case. So the other things are bill payments, clinical decision, disease management. But as I said, I'm going to talk big picture. It's going to be a non-technical thing, and I'll give enough time for questions or opportunity for people to put forward their viewpoints on how we can make this whole thing happen. So let's talk about the global AI healthcare market. It's a very big market. According to markets and markets.com, they're expected to reach from 4.9 billion last year, 2020, to 45.2, almost times 10. But what is fueling this growth in the market? The key things are three main things: large volume of data. You can see from what we do generate on WhatsApp, what we generate on social media, is a huge amount of data being developed, right? So that's one key one. The second is the cloud and edge computing platforms. With the cloud computing platforms, it allows us to store more information. It allows us to really share that information a lot faster than the past technology before cloud computing. But with the edge, how that comes into play when we talk about healthcare is when you look at your smart devices. Your smart devices, your fitness devices, your running devices, they're all connecting and processing information at source and putting that back in the cloud. So you see, the time lag and everything is getting a lot shorter. Data is getting a lot more available and everything. So it's just really very important. How do we coordinate and make all these things happen? Well, those are the things that are there. And then now the rapid AI adoption and growth rate are amongst companies, which I'll talk about further down the line when I talk about the AI readiness index. But you can see that these are the key drivers and what is possible with AI. So now let us look into how do we make this thing happen. I'm going to talk about five key areas. There are obviously more than five key areas, but the five important key areas we should look into to make this thing happen. We're going to talk about data. I mentioned initially how important data is the lifeblood, is the starting point and ending point. Then we go to talk about AI strategy and policies. What sort of AI strategies and policies should we have in place? And then we look into the skills and resources, with skills on the ground, what they can do, research and development, and finally, investment. So in each of these areas, I'm not going to go in depth. I'm going to just mention the principles around it and how we can apply these principles on a bigger scale. So each time I'm looking at scale, I'm looking at an African-wide, continental-wide thing. We may approach it from healthcare perspective, where we're looking at it from an industry perspective and coordinating and collaborating across the continent, or we can actually take everything from a top-down approach where we look at it from an African Council perspective, looking at how do we bring everything together. Because I feel very strongly that to achieve the scale, especially of the very brilliant work I've heard other people doing, which are in silos, we really need to come together to achieve that scale. So let's start with datification. And with datification, we're looking at how do we capture this data? How do we make data available, right? Those are very important things. It must be there. It must be possible. And without us having data, we don't have anything. Data is the starting point and very important for us to achieve. Now we have an issue of lack of data. Now there will be pockets within the private sector doing very well in Africa. There's no doubt about it. There are a few companies out there, I don't want to mention names, but there are companies doing cutting edge stuff. But when we're looking at the bigger picture of public services within Africa and leveraging AI to address the issues we're facing in Africa, especially when we're talking about lifestyle diseases on the rise with non-communicable diseases and things of that nature, we don't really have this data collected in such a way that we can use it. And then when we do collect this data, there's the issue of data labeling, there's the issue of data cleaning, and then how do we apply this data into AI? So one of the key things I feel quite strongly about and has to be done is looking at a digital first approach. We have to look at datification in all its ramifications, because when we're talking about datification, we're talking about rendering everyday things that you're doing. You see, everything you do on WhatsApp, everything you do on is all data, it's all computerized, it's all actually there's a data format, it's all being captured. How do we now select what makes sense from data and how do we move things forward? Before we start to combine the other technologies. So you find out that datification is happening in IoT devices, datification is happening within the blockchain platform. So how do we really look at pulling all these four aspects together? And then by that, we get into a position of big data. Because without big data at that vast quantities, we cannot train the machine learning algorithms that actually give us those very brilliant AI results. Because if you listen to most of the AI solutions happening and the very interesting things, like I remember, if I recall, Johan talked about Tesla, the amount of work and effort put years ago from what we're seeing now is something that is not necessarily highlighted so strongly. So it looks like something that can be achieved in a short space of time. But to get to that same position, let's say fast forward 3-5 years from now, there are things we have to be doing now, hence the digital first approach. So I'll talk briefly about AI strategy and policies. And the strategy has to look at overall are we looking at an AI strategy that is sector dependent, healthcare sector? Or are we working off a wider AI strategy that looking at AI strategy within Africa, and then we have subsection health? But the important thing is the vision and a continental wide strategy. There are a lot of things that are common across all 54 countries. And there are a lot of things that will make sense for us to collaborate on. Now, there are certain countries within the 54 that are actually making inroads, and we can actually learn a lot from them, piggyback, and now create that whole wider vision, right? The other thing we have to look at is AI policies, right? So when we talk about AI policies, we go look at what policies make things happen. What are the policies that enable an effective AI environment that allows that to happen, especially within the healthcare space? And then the AI ethics framework, very important for addressing bias, very important for having things to do like explainable AI. We must make sense of these algorithms that we develop. And if we're going to take solutions from other countries, not non-African countries especially, or other economies that are having different kind of challenges, we have to look and understand how do we want to develop these algorithms, and are they fit for purpose for us? So those are the sort of things. So we should be able to trust the AI, because these are very important issues that have to be addressed, because you could go all the way, develop the smartest system, get to the very end, and adoption of that AI policy is now, or sorry, the AI solution, I should say, is now a challenge for the executives. So let's talk about skills and development. Now, we've been talking a lot about the fourth industrial revolution, and there's growth in that area. There are a lot of trainings and courses on that. Even in CenHealth, we are actually running a training course in health technology under our CenHealth Academy, and we do a lot of workshops and training of individuals on how to use blockchain within healthcare, AI, and all those sort of things. But more importantly, what I have found in going to these organizations is setting up the basic infrastructure, setting up the key prerequisite projects that have to happen before you get to that level. So skilled resources, very important. You look at data scientists, very, very key in this whole mix. And the Open Talent Network is coming to play on this. And I'll tell you how. With the pandemic, there has been a lot of remote working. There's been a lot of actually getting resources, and they can work at their base. So now you find that before we're looking at the brain drain of people living Africa overseas, but now there's the opportunity to attract those in the diaspora to work within Africa if we smartly take care of this. And these are the sort of things that has to be reflected in policy level and also from the strategic point of view. And then we look at hybrid teams. Now, most of us who are on this panel, I think maybe about half of us anyway, mainly focus in the technology side. But we can't achieve anything in the technology side without working very closely with our partners in the medical and health sector who are experts in the in-depth knowledge of their field, especially when you're looking at AI solutions for clinical activities. Because on non-clinical activities, appointments and things that relate to other industry areas, yes, we've made progress, but when you're looking at clinical activities, really making sure to understand that when you look at a radiology image is annotated. The annotation is done by the experts, that's the medical experts. And then we now bring in the data scientists, the skilled people, the project managers, the visionaries to really tie everything together. So a hybrid team is very important. We have to look at cross-functional teams working together, and then the digital maturity of the organization. Now, as I alluded to earlier, when I spoke, I said that most of the organizations, there's some organizations in private sector doing very well. You find that the digital maturity level of that organization is quite high. Their outlook as a workforce is very proactive, very interactive, very embracing of technology. That actually is very different from when, if we're looking at some of the areas of public sector health, where they are behind, there are other challenges they have besides having that whole thing. And hence it brings me clearly to the area of culture. What is the work culture within that organization? How do they view technology? How does executive and management train them? And how do we bring these resources to the table? Because when you're going on an AI strategy journey, it's underpinned by digital health transformation. And if you're not bringing the workforce along, you're actually going to get into a lot of hot water at the end. Why is this? Because people love to be engaged. People love to be part of the whole solution. So when we're talking about this whole thing, it's actually in the broader sense of how do we make this whole thing happen? Yes, the technology is there. Yes, the skills and resources are there, but how do we really connect the dots to make this happen? So let's talk about research and development in AI. I talked earlier about ethics in AI and also in ensuring that we're building very ethical and explainable algorithms is very important, right? And a very key thing that most organizations tend to miss, especially those in the early phase of digital maturity, maybe they're level one or level two of the digital maturity scale, is that there's a profound difference between the AI project lifecycle and an IT project lifecycle or technology project lifecycle. By definition, when we're looking at AI and working with algorithms, there are issues of probability involved. The algorithm is constantly learning, is self-correcting, is improving, and you may find things that you do not necessarily think you will find. And so therefore you now have to go back and rework. So the life cycles are different. So when you're looking at working with that life cycle and now incorporating the other technologies which you want to put into that AI, take for instance, you're incorporating maybe a blockchain kind of thing because you want to use blockchain to address things like encryption and de-identification, or you're looking at an Internet of Things and being integrated with the AI technology because you're now actually getting your data from maybe a blush predator device that is connected to a mobile app or a diabetic device. There's a very different thing of how you can tie these two project life cycles together and make sure that this can be managed. So this is where the skills of the hybrid team comes together, looking at the various challenges and things you have along the way. So the research and development aspect is very key, understanding how these algorithms are developed, how you can share, and how it can work at a very big level. And as I said in the start, we're looking at scale. How do we scale? How do we make this happen on a continental wide level? Because it's very possible to achieve this because with all these things set, you find out that you are now walking to a very stronger situation where we're addressing things like data coming out, we're addressing things like algorithms that work for us and things of that nature. So I'll bring all what I've talked about into context, right? And I'll just talk about a company, Tough Center. They are actually involved in developing drug discovery. The Tough Center, they're based in the States. And one of the things they did is that they were using AI to discover a new drug in 46 days. 46 days. Now, for this to happen, you can imagine the digital maturity level was off the charts for that organization. Availability of data was very important. But hear this, what is very interesting. Normally, from research, it takes about 10 years to bring a new drug into market at a cost of 2.6 billion. So you can imagine 46 days to 10 years and the cost of 2.6 billion. What the cost would have been for 6 days, I don't have that to hand, but it's far, far lower than 2.6 billion. And this is achieved by AI. The other thing we have to bear in mind is the backdrop of what has happened behind the scenes, the maturity level of the organization, the ability to have all this data and everything. So I'll just go through quickly what was achieved with this rapid discovery. So let's look at how this solution had impact. And this is one of the things I used to talk to organizations that were helping to transit into a digital health strategic mindset. So AI techniques were employed using machine learning and deep learning to an extent. And what did they achieve? Within 21 days, they were able to have 30,000 molecules designed. They were able to examine previous research and patents because you're using AI based on the criteria and everything. You're actually going through a lot within a short space of time to get your 30,000. They can synthesize these molecules based on a predefined criteria. So the criteria has been set, and that is actually tied into the algorithms that they have developed. And then they select those that meet the quality of molecules they want to use, which they describe as drug-like, and faster release of new medication at a lower cost, far lower cost. Now, this is ground changing. For us to be in a position to address what we have on the continent, we have the skilled resources, we have the medical expertise, the people who know what is happening, we have the technology resources either on the continent or within the diaspora. And that's why I talk about hybrid teams. That's why I talk about bigger, stronger, intentional collaboration across the board. So all this cannot be possible without investment. It's all down to money. How much are we investing in this thing? How much investment are we making in AI infrastructure? You can hear new update the news about China. China is one of the top when it comes to AI. They have vast amount of data. They are focused on data, and their sort of systems are actually geared towards achieving this. That's because of the very top strong AI infrastructure they've built. Skilled resources. I talked about that briefly. So I don't want to go over that again. We know we need that. We have that, but obviously there's the gaps of skill shortage, and also there's the whole gap of getting enough people, the training of the workforce, especially in the health sector, because financial services and retail, e-commerce are really at the cutting edge when it comes to digitization. So you find that the workforce within those environments tend to be much more embracing of new technology. The healthcare sector all across is not only an African thing tend to be lagging behind in adoption of new training, but there's a valid reason for that because of the sensitivity of health data. Hence, we have to go into how we have our AI policies set up, ensuring that things like GDPR, POPI Act, and everything is adhered to, and how we manage all these things. And then the AI Readiness Index. Now, I'll just briefly talk about the AI Readiness Index. There's a company in the UK, Oxford Insights. They developed the AI Readiness Index, and they look at it on the basis of how prepared or organizations are into AI, what they're doing. Now, from the top 100 countries, Africa starts featuring after the top 50. All right. So after the top 50, the first one you see that comes in, let me just check quickly. Egypt comes in at number 56. South Africa comes in at number 59. Then we have Kenya at number 71. We have Tunisia 69 and Rwanda at 87. But what I'm just trying to point out here is this, is that out of the top 100, we're actually having quite a few featuring from Africa. So there's a lot of traction and we're on the way. So imagine selecting the top countries that are already featuring in the top 100, learning and piggybacking off the best practice and what is out there. We can really make a change and move things a lot faster. But I believe, in my personal view, is that as a collective is more important and much more achievable because of the vast investment that is required in AI. So this is my last slide, and I'll just talk briefly how do we achieve AI adoption, and I'm open to questions, suggestions, and talks. It may not really be a question, maybe a statement, maybe a viewpoint, so we can develop this a bit more. And then I think I do write extensively about articles and everything, and I'll release an article about this sometime. So stronger collaboration, very important at policy level, at program level, and public sector collaboration. Adoption of best practices and working solutions. We just can't take and plug and play AI. It's a bit tricky, a bit dangerous, but having said that, there are ways around working with that and ensuring that it's fit for purpose, especially when I talk about the ethics framework that we have to look into. And for investments, we're looking at investing in AI capabilities, improve R&D capabilities. Mobile communications network is a top for us in Africa. We have it growing, we have it solid. Connectivity and cloud solutions, there's a bit of struggling with connectivity, but that is being addressed as we go around. Conversational platforms, very mature, especially when you talk about WhatsApp, you talk about Facebook Messenger. We can actually take those principles and technologies and develop into secured channels and messaging platforms for the health sector in particular, not necessarily using those sort of solutions out there. And finally, is a digital first approach. As I said, without data, we have nothing. We do not have AI. So data is the first thing. And if we don't have data at that level of data in terms of big data, then we're really clutching at straws because the level of our AI solutions is only as good as how much data we have to train the algorithms. And so, thank you very much, ML Africa, for calling me. That ends my presentation. I'm happy to take on questions. And also, if there are no questions right now, you could just message me and we can talk. Or if anybody has any viewpoint, I'm happy to let them share it now. So thank you for your time. And thank you, everybody.
Oh, thank you so much, Joel. We really appreciate the presentation. What a mouthful that you said there. That without data, there's no AI. It's like a car without engine. The system won't move.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. I don't see any questions on the chat. I see because you said interesting presentation,
Okay.
Joel. Thank you so much. And I believe
Yeah,
if
thank
there are
you, Bukosi.
questions that will come afterwards, definitely they will post on the chat, and then you'll be able to respond. For the sake of time, I think we'll just take a break now, and then
Okay.
we'll move on to our next session that will be held by Peter. We'll take a break, a 2-minute break, and then we'll be back. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.